All right, we want to find the derivative of the inverse tangent function. Okay, so this is the inverse tangent function. We want to find the derivative of that, and we know that tangent of x is the inverse of inverse tangent of x. So we know that when we're trying to find the inverse, the derivative of the inverse, it's going to be 1 over f prime of g of x. So if we want to solve this, the first thing we have to do, we have to figure out what f prime of x is. Okay, the f prime of x would be the derivative of tangent of x would be secant squared of x. Then we need to find f prime of g of x, which would be secant squared of g of x. And then we know that g of x is equal to the inverse tangent of x. So we have this. The inverse, the derivative of the inverse would be 1 over secant squared of the inverse tangent of x. Okay? Which I can think of this as the derivative of g of x 1 over secant of tangent, inverse tangent of x, and then all of this is being squared. Okay? Also notice right here, this has to be an angle, so I'm going to call this theta. Theta equals inverse tangent of x, or another way to think of this would be tangent of theta equals x. Well, we know tangent theta of x is equal to the opposite side over the adjacent side. So if I drew a triangle here, here's theta. The opposite side would be x, and the adjacent side, notice here, would be 1. So we can find the hypotenuse by doing 1 squared plus x squared equals r squared. If I would square root both sides, r would equal the square root of 1 plus x squared. And now, to solve this, I'm going to do g prime of x equals 1 over secant of theta, and I'm going to square that. So look at this. We know that secant is the hypotenuse over the adjacent side. And this should be, this should be the square root. So this is going to be 1 over, I can replace all of this with the square root of 1 plus x squared over 1, which I don't need to do. And then if I square that, that's going to be 1 over x squared. So the derivative of the inverse tangent function is going to be this. This is the proof. We could go through the proof to prove we just did this guy. Okay? But we could go through the proof for all of these. We won't do that. You just need to memorize all of these. So the derivative of arc sine of u with respect to x is going to be u prime all over the square root of 1 minus u squared. The derivative of arc tangent of u with respect to x, we basically just went over that, except we did the example where u was x. It's going to be u prime all over 1 plus u squared. Arc tangent of u, so if you see arc tangent of u, that is the same thing as saying the inverse tangent of u. Next, the derivative of arc secant of u with respect to x is going to be u prime all over the absolute value of u times the square root of u squared minus 1. Okay, so notice the inverse of sine, inverse of tangent, inverse of secant, the derivative of all of those, all of these are positive. Look over here, the cofunctions, so cosine, cotangent, cosecant, all of them are negative. Everything else, is the same. Arc sine of u and arc cosine of u, the derivative of those, everything's the same except the cosine is negative, sine is positive. Same for arc tangent of u versus arc cotangent of u. Arc tangent of u is positive, arc cotangent of u is negative. And same thing for secant versus cosecant. Okay, so hopefully that will help you to memorize those. Again, I would make note cards for these. Quiz yourself on these daily.